Hello friends, welcome again. Friends, last year when I was teaching novel, I asked my students a question, what is novel according to you? Please define novel. And I got a very funny answer from one of my students. She said that a short story is a photograph and a novel is a film. It was indeed funny. Friends, today in this video lecture, we want to define novel and we want to discuss different important elements of novel. Friends, we know that literature is written in different forms like poetry, drama, novel, short story, travelogues, and so on. And we also know that poetry is the most ancient form which existed even before some 2000 years. And the question is, which is the latest form of literature in English? Then the answer is, it is novel. Novel is the latest form of English literature which emerged during the 18th century. But the surprising thing about novel is that though it is the last one to come out, though it is the latest form of literature, still, even in today's times, novel is most widely read and most loved form of literature. It was a kind of a fashion, it became a kind of a fashion, almost a mania among the upper class women to read novels during the 18th century. The novel became what cinema became in 1920s and so on. We know that cinema provided much entertainment to the people 1920s onwards. In the same manner, novel provided entertainment to the readers during the 18th century. Novel became a window of entertainment for the people. During the 18th century, we have some great masters like Samuel Richardson, Henry Fielding, Tobias Smollett, and Lawrence Sterne. These are the four pillars of 18th century English novel, who prepared a very strong foundation of this new form called novel in English literature during the 18th century. But later on, if you come to the 19th century, we have some great masters of novel like Charles Dickens, Thomas Hardy, Emily Bronte, and so many others, who popularized this new form of English literature during the 19th and then also during the 20th century. So friends, today, before we discuss the important elements or features of novel, first of all, let me give you some brief idea about the origin of novel. Friends, generally, we know that novel is nothing but storytelling, okay? And these stories were told in the ancient times too, right? In ancient times, the stories were narrated in poetic form in the ancient epics. Okay, we have some great epic writers in Greek literature like Homer and Virgil. Later on, we received another form of poetry which was known as ballad. Ballad is also narrative poetry and it tells the story, folk tales, in poetic form. So storytelling is not a new thing. In the same manner, if you come to the 14th century and if you examine the Italian literature, then there was a writer called Boccaccio an Italian author who wrote hundreds of stories, short stories, and all his short stories were collected in one book under the title Decameron. Okay, so story writing you find in Italian literature during the 14th century. In the same manner, if you examine the English literature during the 14th century, the father of English poetry, Geoffrey Chaucer, who doesn't know him? Geoffrey Chaucer, the first poet of English literature, who wrote the Canterbury Tales, and there also he wrote two stories in prose language. Later on, if you come to the 17th century, we have some masters of prose writing. We have John Bunyan and his Pilgrim's Progress, Aphra Behn, Daniel Defoe and his Robinson Crusoe, Joseph Addison and Richard Still. These two people, Joseph Addison and Richard Still, they also popularized prose literature in the beginning of the 18th century. So all these things, actually prepared a very nice ground, a very clear ground for Samuel Richardson to write the first novel, Pamela, in 1741. Okay. Now friends, after having a look at the origin of this novel, first of all, let's try to understand what this novel is. Okay. The common definition that we generally know is that, as you can see here on the screen, novel is a fictitious prose narrative. Fictitious means imaginative, okay, full of imagination. Number one, it is prose, it is written in prose, not poetry, and it is narrative. Narrative means story which is narrated. So novel is an imaginative story narrated in prose language, okay, of considerable length. Of considerable length means it is a very lengthy story. Okay, this is the primary difference between a short story and a novel. Both the novel and the short story, they narrate the story, but novel is very lengthy, of considerable length, in which realistic characters and events are presented. Okay, so what is literature? We know, friends, that literature is the reflection of life, reflection of society. Okay, the author, the novelist, imitates this life, copies this life. So real life characters and real life events are presented in novel in a complex plot. So friends, this is a very nice definition of novel. Another definition, let's have a look at this definition. This definition you will find in Webster's dictionary, right? According to Webster, novel is an invented prose narrative. Invented means newly invented during the 18th century. It is a prose narrative that is usually very long and complex. Why complex? Because human life is complex, okay, and human life is presented in this novel. So novel is a newly invented prose narrative that is usually very long and complex and deals especially with human experiences. Deals with means expresses or describes. Novel presents or describes human experience through a usually connected sequence of events. Connected, logically connected events. That means plot, a good plot construction must be there in novel. Okay, let's take a look at another definition given by Henry James. According to Henry James, the only reason for the existence of a novel is that it does attempt to represent life. According to James, novel always attempts, tries to represent life. What we see in our real life, that is represented by the novelist in his work. Okay, Albert Camus has also defined novel by saying that a novel is never anything but a philosophy put into images. So novel must be picturesque. Okay, novel must create some images in our mind, and these images must reveal, must convey some serious philosophy of life. Okay, another definition given by Ralph Waldo Emerson. According to Emerson, every novel is a adapter to Homer. Who was Homer? Homer was an ancient Greek epic poet. Okay, the way Homer has narrated stories in those times before some 2000 years, more than 2000 years in Greek literature, in the same manner after 18th century, the novelists are narrating the story. So every novelist is adapter to Homer according to Emerson. So friends, after having a look at all these different definitions given by different scholars and critics, we can summarize the whole discussion by saying that novel tells us a story. Number one, it is very long. Number two, it is written in prose style. Number three, it is imaginative story. Number four, it reveals some philosophy of life. Number five, okay, it presents some real life characters and events. Number six, and it must be presented in a complex plot. So these are some of the points that we can gather from all these different definitions given by critics. So friends, now let's start the discussion of important elements of novel. As you can see here on the screen, these are the 6 main elements of novel: theme of philosophy of life, characters and dialogues, plot construction, setting, conflict and narrative technique. So friends, one by one we are going to discuss all these 6 characteristics of novel. Number 1, theme. Theme means the central idea. The novelist tries to express his vision of life, his understanding of life, or his philosophy of life in his novel. Friends, remember, no work of art can exist without this central idea. No work of art can exist without some serious philosophical thought. Okay? Why? Because every novelist has been given some responsibility on his shoulder to convey some serious messages for the readers and for the society. So that is the prime element of novel. You read any great novel, you will find some good messages in those novels. Ernest Hemingway, friends, this is my favorite novel. I tell you, please read this novel whenever you get it. Old Man and the Sea. When you read this novel, Ernest Hemingway, an American novelist, has conveyed this message that man is not made for defeat. Man can be destroyed, but not defeated. So, such a nice message, such a nice philosophy of life is presented by the novelist here. You read another novel written by Roy Bennett, The Light in the Heart. That novel also expresses a very important philosophy. If you believe very strongly in something, stand up and fight for it. So this is the message, or this is the philosophy which is expressed by this novel, through this novel by Roy Bennett. So that was the first element. Second important feature of novel is characterization, use of characters and dialogues. Friends, novel we know is a long narrative story in which real life events and real life characters are presented. So, human life is represented in the novel, and life cannot be without the people. Okay, so characters who represent these people in the novel are very important. Generally, in novel, friends, we have two types of characters, minor characters and major characters. The major characters are generally round characters, and minor characters, friends, are generally flat characters. Major characters are also known as the protagonist or the antagonist, okay, and they fetch the whole string in their hand. All events which are presented in the story in the novel, they revolve around these major characters. And this is, sometimes characters are so important in novels that the novelists themselves are known by their characters. We know Charles Dickens, the 19th century novelist, by his character called Pip, whom we find in his novel Great Expectations. We know Ernest Hemingway by his character Santiago, whom we find in his novel Old Man and the Sea. In the same manner, we have hundreds of such examples where characters are more important, like Pamela, the first novel, even Sir Charles Grandison. There also you find that the novel is character oriented. Even Harry Potter, the novel which you must have read, okay, so characters make the novels and the novelists immortal. Side by side, friends, remember that with these characters we need the element of dialogues in novel. Dialogues impart liveliness to the novel. Dialogues give life to the characters, right? Why? Because only description, mere description sometimes makes the novel monotonous and boring. Okay, so if you want to make your novel lively, if you want to make your novel vital, your characters vital, you need to make use of dialogues in the novel. Friends, let's move ahead to discuss the next important feature of novel, and that is plot construction. Friends, Aristotle, the great Greek philosopher, has defined plot in this manner, as you can see here on the screen. According to Aristotle, plot is a series of events logically connected with one another. Okay, the novelist has to arrange all the actions or events which he wants to present in his story, in his novel, in a logical manner. There must be logic between the beginning and the middle, between the middle and the end. Okay, if the events are presented in a haphazard manner, say for example, then what happens? It creates confusion in the mind of the readers, and we find it very difficult to understand the characters, to understand the story. Okay, generally in novel we have these three types of plots: simple plot, episodic plot and complex plot. Simple plot means it contains only one main story. Episodic plot, which is considered as the worst kind of plot, the novelist must ignore this episodic plot where the events are presented but there is no logic among them, right? That is called episodic plot. But the best kind of plot, according to the critics of English literature, is complex plot. Complex plot means one main story, and side by side, we have one or two subsidiary stories going ahead. Okay, that is considered as the best kind of plot, complex plot. Okay, another important feature of novel is setting. Setting means the background in which the whole story or all the events take place. That background must be created by the novelist, okay, and that creation of background is known as setting. And this setting includes two things, and they are place and time. Place means, like the events are taking place in the novel, okay, and since the novels are very lengthy, the story may move from one place to the other, because all the scenes do not take place at one place only, right? So the novelist introduces different places like garden, like college, like school, home, drawing room, right, airport, railway station, market, so many different places are presented. But remember friends, if there are too many places presented in the novel, it might sometimes create confusion for the readers to understand the events and the background. So limited number of places must be presented in the novel. Another important feature in setting is time, okay. The story may take place in past, present or future, right. The novelist has to stick to some social, economic and political conditions of the time in which he presents his novel. Say for example, the novelist is presenting the characters of the 16th century, then he has to consider what social and political conditions were existing in the during the 16th century. According to that only he has to dress his characters, he has to give dialogues to his characters considering the time. Time also includes flashbacks, sometimes the character starts thinking about his past, so the readers are taken into past, right? Again they are taken back into present, then they are taken into future. So these are known as flashbacks. So flashbacks are also important in novel, but friends remember, too many flashbacks also create confusion in the mind of the reader. Another important feature is conflict. Friends, the struggle that we have in human life, that same struggle must be presented in novel. Why? Because novel is the reflection of human life, okay. So no conflict, no story. The story ends where there is no conflict. So conflict, you take the example of Ramayana. In Ramayana, Lord Ram killed Ravana and the story ended over there, okay. In the same manner, Mahabharata, the Kauravas were defeated by Pandavas and the story ended over there. So no conflict, no story. In the same manner, this conflict must be presented in novel. There may be different kinds of conflicts, as you can see here on the screen. A character is presented struggling against nature, right? Sometimes a struggle between two different characters, that struggle is presented. Sometimes a struggle within the mind of the character, internal conflict is presented, okay. Sometimes a character fights against the opposing forces of the society, the whole society. So different types of conflicts are presented in the novel. And friends, now we move on to discuss the last element, but very important element of novel, and that is narrative techniques, okay. As I told you in the beginning, while defining the novel, we said that novel is a long narrative story. So narration is done by the novelist. The novelist tries to narrate the whole story. So he has to adopt some narrative technique to present his characters, to present his stories before the readers, right? In English novels, generally we have 3-4 kinds of narrative techniques. Number one is epistolary technique. Epistolary technique means writing through letters, right? sometimes in the novel, the characters are writing letters to each other or one another, right? And this is how through later writing the story develops. If you want an example, all novels written by Samuel Richardson, Pamela, okay, Sir Charles Grandison, and Clarissa, all these three novels are written in this technique, epistolary novels, right? Second type of technique that we have in English literature is first person narration. Okay, here the protagonist himself narrates the story. So the words like I, we, us, me, such pronouns are used by the novelist, so that the protagonist develops, he talks directly to the reader. Okay, we feel that as if we are talking to the protagonist, right? So this creates a kind of intimacy with the reader. And if you want an example, Charles Dickens during the 19th century wrote a very popular novel, Great Expectations, where Pip, P-I-P, Pip is the name of the character protagonist, he tells the whole story to the reader. Okay. Third technique is use of third person narration. Here the author himself as the third person tells us a story. Friends, when we were children, our grandpa, grandma, they used to tell us stories. Once upon a time there was a king, right? So that is the third person narration, where the novelist is using he, the pronouns like he and she and it and all, right? And the example is Jane Austen's novel Pride and Prejudice. And the fourth and last technique that we find in English novels is stream of consciousness technique. Friends, this is considered as the modern technique which became very popular towards the end of 19th century and in the beginning of the 20th century. Virginia Woolf, who wrote To the Lighthouse, is considered as the most important exponent of using this stream of consciousness technique in her novels. This is also known as psychological technique, okay, where the novelist tries to express the mental condition, the mental psyche of the characters. I mean, the thoughts are presented here in the novel as they actually happen in the mind of the character, right? So stream of consciousness of the mind of the character, that is presented here, okay. And in this novel generally we have loose plot construction, the story is also fragmented, there is no use of logic in such novels, right? And that's why sometimes for the readers this technique makes it difficult for the readers to understand the novel and the story. So friends, here we come to the end of this discussion on the definition and elements of novel. But before I leave, let me summarize the whole discussion by saying that novel is a form of literature which narrates the story in so many pages, more than 100 or 200 pages, okay. It presents the internal as well as external conflict of human life, okay. It presents real life characters, real life events, okay. And the ultimate aim of the novelist is generally to express, to convey, to present his philosophy of life, which is having some universal appeal, and that in fact is the most important thing in novel. So friends, here we come to the end of this discussion. If you have any doubts or questions, feel free to write to me in the comment section of this channel. And friends, a little request, if you really liked this video lecture, please share this lecture among your friends and classmates, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Thank you very much.